What's good, everyone? Welcome to Summon the Path. If you're new to the channel, my name is Jake, and I'm going to go over a $20 upgrade option for Merciless Rage, one of the new Commander 2019 decks. Now, this deck is already pretty playable and pretty fun out of the box, but these 12 cards that I'm going to go over, I think will really help kind of bring up the playability and competitiveness of the deck overall, and it's only 20 bucks, so I think they're pretty good options to make the deck that much better. So the first card that I'm going to talk about is Archfiend of Ifnir. Now it's 2 black and 3 colorless for a 5/4 flying demon. Whenever you cycle or discard another card, you put a -1/-1 counter on each creature your opponents control. And then it itself has cycling for 2 colorless mana as well. Now this is great because this is what this deck is trying to do, right? We're trying to cycle cards, we're trying to discard cards, play cards for their madness cost, and every time we do that, we get to put a -1/-1 counter on each creature our opponents control. So we're suppressing the threats that our opponents have in the form of creatures. We're also just getting a big 5/4 flying demon. Who doesn't want that? That seems great. I don't know why this wasn't included in the deck originally, but at 75 cents or thereabouts, this is a very easy include. Definitely look to add this card. Next is Kevlar Flames. Now this is out of M20. It's a mythic, but it's still only $2. So 3 red and 2 colorless, we get a 6/5 elemental knight that has a pump ability. We're not so much interested in that. But when it enters the battlefield, we get to discard any number of cards, then draw that many cards. This is fantastic, especially later in the game if we have extra mana. We can discard some of our madness cards, get the value out of them, and also just replace them with however many cards we're discarding, we're drawing that many. And then when it dies, it deals X damage to each opponent and each planeswalker they control, where X is the number of lands in our graveyard. So some of our lands will have cycling, but we're also just going to naturally be discarding some of our lands to some of our other abilities, like our commander and some of our other discard outlets. So when it does die, if it does die, we're getting a little extra free value in being able to do damage directly to our opponents and planeswalkers they control. And at only $2, it's a pretty great include. Next is Faithless Looting. Now, Faithless Looting was actually a really expensive common for how many times it was printed. It's still around $1, but given that it was just banned in Modern, we should see this card decrease in price quite a bit. Now, it was also included in one of the other Commander 2019 decks. It just wasn't included in this one for some reason. But for a red, we get to draw 2 cards and then discard 2 cards. Again, a discard outlet, what our deck is looking to do, and it has flashback, which is even better because it allows us to cast it from our graveyard, either after we've casted it once already, or if we've used this card as a discard option, we can still get some value out of it by casting it out of our graveyard. Again, it's only $1, but you could either pick it up now or wait. It might go down to 50 cents or a quarter, but I think at $1 it's just fine to pick up now. Next is Gamble. Now this is one of the more expensive options. Actually, this is the most expensive option that we get to search our library for a card, put that card into our hand, and then we discard a card at random. Now the discarding a card at random obviously isn't great because we might actually just be discarding the card that we went and found, but because we have enough cards that we want to be discarding, including this in the deck, I think is well worth it and definitely worth kind of rolling the dice and risking the downside of having to discard a card at random. It's about $5. Definitely still think this card is worth it. Berean Descent is next. It costs 2 black and 4 colorless for an enchantment. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player loses 1 life and discards a card. So this works for everyone. We don't mind it because that's what we're trying to do. And our opponents, they are probably going to be pretty annoyed with this. We are getting extra value out of it because our opponents are discarding cards that they probably want to be keeping, and then we're getting the value out of being able to discard cards and trigger things like the madness costs, or just filling our graveyard with creatures that we can reanimate, or things that have flashback like Faithless Looting. And then this also has a madness cost of 2 colorless and 2 black. So if we're discarding this, we can get it into play for cheaper than the 6 mana that it normally costs. Neheb, Dreadhorde Champion, is next. At 2 red and 2 colorless, we get a 5/4 Trampler. Now, when it deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, we can discard any number of cards. If we do, we draw that many and then add that much red mana. So if we get in for damage with Neheb and we discard 3 cards, we're going to draw 3 cards and add 3 red mana. This is fantastic. Again, a great discard outlet. It lets us cycle through our deck, get rid of the cards we maybe don't want, or cards that we want to discard to cast for their madness cost. We get cards back, and we're adding red mana for each number of cards we do that with. So this is fantastic. At only 50 cents, printed out of War of the Spark. I wouldn't even be surprised if you find this in people's bulk piles. Definitely pick this up. This is a great card to add to the deck. Rotting Rats is next. It's a black and a colorless for a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, each player discards a card. So here again, we're getting the value out of discarding a card that we want to discard, and we're forcing our opponents to discard cards that they probably don't want to discard. The great thing about Rotting Rats is it also has Unearth for a black and a colorless. Unearth lets us play this creature from our graveyard, put it into the battlefield, it gains haste, and then we exile at the end of the turn. But what's great about Unearth is if we've already discarded Rotting Rats to, say, a Faithless Looting or Kevlar Flame to use their ability, we can still get the value out of casting the Rotting Rats from our graveyard. So at 50 cents or thereabouts, also a great include into the deck. Shadow of the Grave is a rare out of Amonkhet. It also is about 50 cents. And Shadow of the Grave costs a black and colorless, and it lets us return to our hand all cards in your graveyard that were cycled or discarded this turn. This is fantastic. If we've gotten in combat damage with Neheb, or we just cast Kevlar Flames and we've discarded 4 cards and drawn 4 cards, we cast Shadow of the Grave, we get those 4 cards that we just discarded back into our hand. So it was basically like we just drew 4 cards for free. Shadow of the Grave is fantastic. Scourge Familiar, now this is the second most expensive card that I'm suggesting, but I think it's well worth it. It's about $4. It costs a black and 4 colorless for a 3/2 flyer, but we get to discard a card to add a black mana to our mana pool. So if we're discarding 3 cards, we get a Dark Ritual out of it. We're also discarding cards that we're wanting to get rid of. So having the upside of being able to get black mana out of it is fantastic. Songs of the Damned is next. It's about a quarter out of Ultimate Masters. It costs a black, and what it does is it adds a black mana for each creature in our graveyard. This is great because we're undoubtedly going to have some number of creatures in our graveyard. So being able to cast this and get 3, 4, 5, I could even see potentially 7, 8, 9, or even 10 mana out of this for a single black and a card. That is amazing. Great ramp spell. At a quarter, definitely toss this in your deck. The next 2 cards are lands. They're just going to help with mana fixing a little bit better, help us cast our cards. Canyon Slough is a swamp mountain. It taps for a black or a red mana. It does enter the battlefield tapped, but it also has cycling for 2. So if we draw this late in the game and we don't really need mana, we can just pay the 2 mana, discard it, and draw a card off the top of our deck to replace it. And then Foreboding Ruins also taps for a black or red. As it enters the battlefield, you may reveal a swamp or mountain card from your hand. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped. So as long as you have a swamp or mountain in your hand, which includes Canyon Slough, you reveal it. Foreboding Ruins comes into play untapped, and we get a dual land out of it. Later in the game, if we don't have any lands in our hand, chances are it'll come into play tapped, but hopefully later in the game, we're not too worried about mana, but this card is really about sequencing. What you don't want to do is play, if you start your opening 7 and you have Swamp, Mountain, Foreboding Ruins, you don't want to go turn 1 Swamp, turn 2 Mountain, turn 3 Foreboding Ruins, because then it'll come into play tapped and you'll feel real bad. So that concludes my under $20 upgrade options for Merciless Rage out of Commander 2019. If you guys like this video, you'll probably like my other videos. Make sure you check out some of my openings. I truly enjoy doing this. I hope you guys get at least a little bit something out of it. It's a huge help if you like, subscribe, leave a comment, you know the drill. But until the next one, my friends, I will see you later. Take care of yourselves. Have a great day, and bye-bye.